Today's reading is Luke chapter 7 verses 1 to 17. Two amazing, inspiring stories of healing that reveal more of who Jesus is and indeed who we are called to be, our identity in Him. There are some real contrasts in these two stories. We've got this wealthy centurion. He's funded the building of a synagogue. He's an impressive character. He holds power. He's a man, which is significant in that culture. He's a military leader. He's got all the right theology. He's been proactive. He sent an envoy of elders to ask Jesus for a miracle. And then there's this widow, a woman, someone who's lost her only son, her only source of income, a sure recipe for absolute poverty in this culture. And she has no words, only tears. And Jesus, filled with compassion at this tragic scenario unfolding before his eyes, this funeral, he raises her son from the dead. And it says, did you notice that the dead man began to talk? Wouldn't you love to know what he said? That's a distraction. But both received their miracle, the centurion and the widow. Just a few random thoughts from this passage because there's so much in it. But first of all, I'm just really grasped how we see here how authority releases power. Authority releases God's power. And often the example I use to show the difference between power and authority is how a police officer might step out into the road, a traffic officer might raise their hand in front of a speeding car. Now, that officer doesn't have the physical power to stop a speeding vehicle, but because he has been commissioned, because he carries that delegated authority, because he has been clothed with that uniform, well, invariably the driver pulls over and is issued a ticket. And the same is true of the centurion, the relationship between authority and power. The centurion was a man under authority, under Caesar's authority, so he could speak and stuff would happen. When he gave a command to those under him, it was like Caesar himself had issued the command. And so people acted. Change happened. And the same, of course, was true of Jesus. The centurion could see that. Jesus was clothed with the Father's power. He spoke the words that the Father had given him in obedience to the Father, under the Father's authority. And so sickness and demons had to obey and flee. And the same is true of us, of you, of me. We have been commissioned. We have been given Christ's authority. We have been clothed with Christ. We wear Christ almost like a military uniform or like that police officer. And so we too have the authority to speak. And when we speak, you need to know that stuff is going to happen because our authority releases God's power. That's the first point. Authority releases power. And then the second point that I want to make that goes hand in hand with this is compassion. Compassion. In this second story, we see how Jesus was full of compassion. Compassion led Jesus into action. Compassion led Jesus to exercise his authority. It says that when he saw this tragic scenario unfolding before him, when he saw the woman's pain, his heart went out to her. And you know, Jesus sees you right where you are. He sees you in your pain, and he is filled with compassion for you, with love for you. Now, I don't want to reduce the miraculous healing into a formula because it never works like that. It is not a formula. But I do believe between these two miracles, for the centurion, for the woman of the widow at Nain, we see something of how God's power is released through us to heal, to release the miraculous. It's about a heart of compassion, a heart that breaks for the pain of the one that is suffering. You know, over the years I've met people who were so in faith for God to use them in healing ministry. They would pray for the sick at every opportunity. But when you scratch beneath the surface, it was a little bit more about them being used by God, them being successful, them being recognized, celebrated even. And so it starts with compassion. It's about compassion and authority. Authority that is an unswerving confidence of who we are in Christ, clothed with Christ, able to speak on Christ's behalf and knowing that when we do, something will change. And as we do so, we will see mountains moved, we will see bodies healed, we will see the suffering soul finding peace. So let's allow compassion to rise in our hearts for the suffering around us, and let's with confidence speak breakthrough into those situations.